Welcome back to Mountain Justice, where we share the most incredible stories of wilderness disputes, property battles, and the shocking truth that sometimes emerges when entitled neighbors push too far. I'm your host Jake, and today's story will absolutely blow your mind. It's about a woman who called 911 claiming her neighbors were illegally blocking her access to her mountain property, until police arrived and discovered the shocking truth about who really owned what. She was screaming at the dispatcher that we had stolen her land and illegally changed the locks on what she claimed was her private mountain access. But what she didn't know was that my wife is actually a federal judge, and our simple cabin sits on property that's been in her family for over a century. Let me paint you a picture of the characters in this mountain drama that unfolded in the remote wilderness of Colorado's Rocky Mountains, where assumptions about simple cabin owners led to the most embarrassing 911 call in county history. I'm David Chen, a 39-year-old emergency room physician who works at Denver General Hospital. After spending 12-hour shifts dealing with urban trauma and medical emergencies, I treasure the weekends I can spend at our remote mountain cabin, where the biggest emergency is usually a raccoon getting into the garbage or a deer eating my wife's vegetable garden. My wife, Judge Patricia Patty Chen Martinez, is a 41-year-old federal judge for the District of Colorado, appointed 3 years ago after serving as a prosecutor and then as a state court judge. Most people don't recognize her outside of her courtroom, especially when she's dressed in hiking boots and flannel shirts at our mountain retreat. The cabin sits on 80 acres of pristine wilderness that has been in Patty's family since 1897, when her great-great-grandfather, a Mexican-American railroad worker named Carlos Martinez, homesteaded the land under the original Land Grant Act. The property includes old-growth forest, a natural spring, and some of the most spectacular views in the Colorado Rockies. Then there's Karen Whitmore, a 52-year-old real estate developer from Denver who bought a luxury vacation home about 2 miles down the mountain from our cabin 6 months ago. Karen paid $1.2 million for a massive modern house that looks like it was teleported from Beverly Hills to the wilderness, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows, a heated driveway, and landscaping that requires constant water trucking to survive at 8,000 feet elevation. Karen made her fortune developing strip malls and luxury condos in Denver suburbs, and she approaches mountain living with the same aggressive entitlement that made her successful in commercial real estate. She seems to believe that spending over $1 million on a vacation home gives her special rights to the surrounding wilderness. Her inner circle includes Marcus Webb, a local contractor who told Karen that she could probably claim adverse possession of unused mountain land around her property. Sandra Kim, a real estate agent who assured Karen that most mountain properties have unclear boundaries that could be disputed. And Robert Torres, a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and had been encouraging Karen to assert her rights over neighboring land. The supporting cast included Deputy Sheriff Mike Johnson, a 15-year veteran who had seen every possible mountain property dispute, County Surveyor Linda Park, who maintained detailed records of all property boundaries in the county, and most importantly, Sheriff Amanda Walsh, who had dealt with Karen's complaints before and was getting tired of her entitled attitude. Our cabin is deliberately rustic and low-key. From the outside, it looks like a simple mountain retreat built by people with more enthusiasm than money. The main structure is a log cabin built in the 1920s, with additions added over the decades as the family grew and prospered. What you can't see from the outside is that the property is completely legal and properly maintained, with clear title, updated surveys, and all permits in perfect order. The cabin may look simple, but it sits on some of the most valuable wilderness property in Colorado, worth well over $2 million at current market prices. The access road to our cabin runs through our own property, starting from a county road about a mile down the mountain. The road was built by Patty's grandfather in the 1940s and has been continuously maintained by our family ever since. It's clearly marked as private property, with signs posted every few hundred yards. About 6 months ago, Karen started using our private road as a shortcut to reach hiking trails on the backside of the mountain. Instead of taking the longer public access route, she would drive up our road, park near our cabin, and then hike across our property to reach national forest land. Initially, we didn't mind occasional hikers using the road, especially since many longtime locals had informal arrangements to share access during hunting season or emergencies. But Karen was different. She acted like she owned the place and became increasingly aggressive about what she saw as her rights to use the road. The problem started when Karen began bringing groups of friends and clients up our road for what she called wilderness tours. She would drive convoys of expensive SUVs up the private road, park them near our cabin, and lead groups of city people on hiking expeditions across our property. When I politely asked her to use the public access road instead, Karen became hostile. "This is public mountain land," she declared. "You can't just block access because you got here first. I have as much right to be here as you do." I tried to explain that the road was private and ran through our family's property, but Karen dismissed this as typical mountain gatekeeping. She seemed to believe that anyone with enough money to buy mountain property automatically gained access rights to surrounding land. The situation escalated when Karen started bringing clients to view available development opportunities on what she claimed was underutilized mountain land. She was actually trespassing on our property while showing investors sites where she planned to build luxury cabins similar to her own. That's when Patty decided we needed to install a locked gate at the bottom of our road. The gate was clearly marked with private property signs and included our contact information for anyone who had legitimate business on our land. Karen discovered the new gate on a Saturday morning when she arrived with a group of potential investors she was planning to take on a wilderness development tour. She was furious to find her access blocked and immediately called me, screaming about illegal obstruction and violation of mountain access rights. "You can't just block a public road because you don't like sharing," she yelled over the phone. "I've been using this road for months, and I have established rights." I calmly explained that the road had always been private, that we had simply installed a gate on our own property, and that she was welcome to use the public access road that was clearly marked on all county maps. "This is harassment." Karen screamed. "You're trying to monopolize public mountain land. I'm calling the police." "That's your right," I replied. "The officers can explain property law when they arrive." What happened next was the most entertaining 911 call the county dispatch center had received in years. Karen called 911 claiming that her neighbors had illegally blocked access to public mountain land and were threatening her with unlawful imprisonment by locking a gate on what she insisted was a public road. The dispatcher, who had dealt with Karen's complaints before, tried to explain that property disputes were civil matters that required resolution through proper legal channels. But Karen was insistent that this was an emergency requiring immediate police intervention. "They've stolen access to my property," she screamed at the dispatcher. "This is theft of public resources. I demand immediate action." Deputy Sheriff Mike Johnson was dispatched to our property to investigate the complaint. Johnson had been patrolling mountain properties for 15 years and was familiar with every road, boundary, and access dispute in the county. When he arrived at our locked gate, he found Karen pacing back and forth while yelling at a group of confused investors about typical mountain politics and insider access control. She immediately rushed to his patrol car and launched into a frantic explanation of how we had illegally blocked her access rights. "Officer, these people have installed an illegal gate to block public access to mountain land," she declared. "I've been using this road for months, and now they're trying to cut off access to prevent legitimate development." Deputy Johnson looked at the gate, then at the clearly posted private property signs, then at Karen. "Do you have documentation showing that this is a public road?" "It has to be public." Karen replied, "It's the only access to huge areas of mountain land. You can't just privatize mountain access. Actually, if this is private property, the owners have every right to control access. Do you have any legal documents showing you have easement rights to this road?" Karen's confidence began to waver. "Well, no, but I've been using it for months. That establishes usage rights under adverse possession laws." Deputy Johnson suppressed a smile. After 15 years of mountain patrol, he had heard every possible misinterpretation of property law from entitled city people who thought they could claim wilderness rights through wishful thinking. Adverse possession requires continuous, exclusive use for a period of years, along with several other legal requirements that clearly don't apply here. Let me contact the property owners and get this sorted out. When Johnson called the number posted on our gate, Patty answered and explained that she was currently at the cabin and would be happy to come down to discuss the situation. She asked Johnson to give her a few minutes to change out of her gardening clothes. What Karen didn't expect was that the simple cabin wife who came down to meet with the deputy was actually dressed in professional attire appropriate for someone who needed to maintain judicial dignity even in wilderness settings. Judge Patricia Chen Martinez introduced herself to Deputy Johnson, showed her federal judicial identification, and politely asked about the nature of the complaint. Johnson immediately recognized her name and title, having testified in her courtroom during several criminal cases. "Your Honor," Johnson said respectfully, "we have a complaint from Ms. Whitmore here claiming that your gate is blocking her access to public property." Judge Chen Martinez turned to Karen with the same calm authority she used in federal court. Ms. Whitmore, I understand you believe you have access rights to our family's private road. Can you show me the legal documentation supporting that claim? Karen was visibly taken aback by Patty's professional demeanor and authoritative presence. Well, this road provides the only practical access to large areas of mountain land. You can't just monopolize access because you got here first. Actually, Judge Chinmatina's replied, property ownership is exactly about who has legal title, not who arrived when. This property has been in my family for over 120 years, with clear title and documented boundaries. The road you've been using runs entirely through our private property. She pulled out a folder of documents that she had brought from the cabin. Here's our current survey, property deed, and tax records. You're welcome to review them. Deputy Johnson examined the documents while Karen looked increasingly uncomfortable. The survey clearly showed that the road ran entirely through the Chinmatina's family property, with no public access rights or easements. Ms. Whitmore, Judge Chinmatina's continued, I understand you may have been confused about the property boundaries, but your usage of our road without permission constitutes trespassing. However, we're willing to discuss this matter reasonably if you'd like to find a solution. That's when Karen made her biggest mistake. Instead of accepting the clear legal facts and trying to work out a compromise, she decided to escalate the confrontation. This is ridiculous, she shouted. You mountain people think you can control everything just because you've been here longer. I've invested over $1 million in this area, and I have rights. Judge Chinmatina's maintained her judicial composure, but her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with disruptive behavior in legal settings. Ms. Whitmore, your investment in your own property doesn't create rights to other people's property. The law is quite clear on this matter. You're currently trespassing on private property, and you're doing so in front of a law enforcement officer. Deputy Johnson stepped forward. I've reviewed the documentation. This is clearly private property, and you don't have legal access rights. You need to leave immediately and use public roads for any future access to national forest lands. But Karen wasn't finished. I want to file charges against these people for blocking public access. This is conspiracy to monopolize mountain resources. That's when Judge Chinmatina's revealed the full extent of Karen's legal ignorance. Ms. Whitmore, since you're discussing filing charges, I should mention that as a federal judge, I'm quite familiar with both property law and criminal law. What you're describing as our illegal actions are actually lawful exercise of property rights. However, your repeated trespassing, after being clearly informed that this is private property, could constitute criminal trespass under Colorado law. Karen's face went white as she finally realized who she had been arguing with. You're a judge. I'm a federal judge for the District of Colorado, Patty replied calmly. And you've been trespassing on my family's property while threatening to file frivolous charges based on your misunderstanding of property law. Deputy Johnson was struggling not to laugh as he watched Karen realize the magnitude of her mistake. She had called 911 to report illegal actions by a federal judge who was simply controlling access to her own property. Your Honor, Johnson said formally, would you like to press charges for criminal trespass? Judge Chinmatina's considered the question carefully. Deputy Johnson, I think Ms. Whitmore has learned an important lesson about property law today. If she agrees to use public access roads in the future and stops trespassing on our property, I'm willing to consider this matter resolved. Karen was too stunned to argue further. She mumbled something about misunderstanding the situation and quickly gathered her group of investors, who had been watching the entire exchange with obvious embarrassment. As Karen's convoy disappeared down the mountain, Deputy Johnson shook his head in amazement. Your Honor, in 15 years of mountain patrol, I've never seen someone call 911 to report a federal judge for exercising property rights on her own land. Judge Chinmatina smiled. Deputy, you'd be surprised how many people think the law works differently when they really, really want something to be true. The story didn't end there. Word of Karen's embarrassing encounter spread quickly through the local community, where many people had been frustrated by her entitled attitude and aggressive development plans. Karen had been trying to pressure several long-time mountain families into selling their properties to her development company, using tactics that bordered on harassment. When people learned that she had called 911 to report a federal judge for illegal actions on her own property, Karen's credibility as a serious developer was completely destroyed. Her real estate agent, Sandra Kim, quietly dropped Karen as a client after learning about the incident. Her contractor, Marcus Webb, suddenly became unavailable for future projects. Even her lawyer, Robert Torres, suggested that she might want to reassess her mountain property strategy. Most importantly, the investors who witnessed Karen's meltdown decided that she wasn't someone they wanted to work with on development projects. Several deals that Karen had been negotiating fell through when potential partners learned about her confrontation with a federal judge over basic property rights. Within 6 months, Karen put her million-dollar mountain house back on the market and moved her development business back to Denver suburbs, where property boundaries are clearly marked and she couldn't mistake federal judges for simple cabin owners. The new owners of her house turned out to be a retired couple from Boulder who appreciated mountain privacy and had no interest in development schemes or property disputes. They introduced themselves to us properly and have been excellent neighbors ever since. Our cabin remains exactly as it has been for over a century, a peaceful family retreat where we can escape the complexities of urban life and enjoy the wilderness that Patty's ancestors worked so hard to preserve. The private road that caused so much drama continues to provide access to our property, just as it has for decades. The locked gate has never been an issue for anyone who understands basic property rights and treats other people's land with appropriate respect. Judge Chen Martinez occasionally tells the story of Karen's 911 call during judicial conferences, using it as an example of how assumptions about people's backgrounds can lead to embarrassing mistakes. The story has become something of a legend in Colorado legal circles. Deputy Johnson, who has since been promoted to sergeant, still considers it one of the most entertaining calls of his career. He sometimes uses it in training sessions to demonstrate the importance of verifying facts before making assumptions about property disputes. The lesson here goes beyond mountain property rights or entitled neighbors. It's about the fundamental principle that the law applies equally regardless of how much money someone has spent or how entitled they feel to other people's property. Karen Whitmore assumed that her million-dollar investment gave her special rights to surrounding property and that the simple mountain people she was dealing with wouldn't understand sophisticated legal concepts. She was wrong on both counts. She also assumed that calling 911 would somehow validate her position and force us to accommodate her demands. Instead, she ended up arguing with a federal judge about property law while a sheriff's deputy documented her trespassing. Most importantly, this story demonstrates that respect for property rights and common courtesy are far more valuable than aggressive entitlement and wishful thinking about legal rights. Karen could have easily arranged legitimate access to hiking areas through proper channels, but her demanding attitude and legal ignorance made cooperation impossible. The irony is perfect. Karen called emergency services to report illegal actions by people who were simply exercising their legal rights on their own property. She ended up educating herself about property law through one of the most embarrassing encounters possible, arguing with a federal judge while standing on private property she had no right to access. Sometimes justice doesn't require courts or legal proceedings. Sometimes it just requires people to learn the difference between what they want and what they're legally entitled to have. That's today's episode of Mountain Justice. If you enjoyed watching an entitled developer discover she was arguing property law with a federal judge, hit that subscribe button and share your own neighbor dispute stories in the comments. Until next time, remember, property rights are real rights, and there's no amount of money or entitlement that changes basic law, especially when you're arguing with the people who interpret that law for a living.